FSU admin, since the shooting, has been giving a lot of empty promises, saying, we're never going to forget this, and we will never forget this, of course, but what are you going to do to actually address the root cause of this problem? The shooter was a white supremacist, and they're not doing anything to address that. Instead, they're, repressing progressive students, right? I get that Richard McCullough is sad about this situation, but you need to let your sadness and your anger move you to actually make changes to prevent another tragedy.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. Our guest today is Lain Dorsey from the Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS. They are the head of communications for the chapter at Florida State University, or the Tallahassee SDS, as it's known, because it represents several campuses. So welcome to Fight Back Radio, Lain.
Thank you, Richard. It's great to be here.
I want to start out by talking a little bit about an incident, a shooting that recently happened at Florida State University. Some of you may have seen it in the newspapers. 20-year-old Phoenix Ickner, who is the son of a Leon County Sheriff's deputy, got the gun from his mother, or used his mother's gun to kill two people, Robert Morales and Tiru Chabba. First, I want to give Fight Back Radio's condolences to the families of the victims of both Robert and Tiru. And also, there was 6 people who were wounded in the shooting. So I want to ask you a little bit about this particular incident that had to be devastating to your campus. You're recently a graduate of FSU. Could you give us a little context into Phoenix Ickner and what was going on and what led to this shooting?
Yeah, so the shooting occurred on April 17th, and we didn't know a whole lot in the moment. Of course, it was a very chaotic few hours as we were just figuring out what was going on. There were rumors of multiple shooters, rumors of an even higher death toll. When we learned who the shooter was after the fact, Phoenix Ickner, we learned that he is a registered Republican, a white supremacist who had openly mocked SDS protests before. Previously, he had stood across from an anti-Trump protest that Tallahassee Students for a Democratic Society put on, and called the protest pointless, laughing at us, mocking us. And it's honestly pretty sickening to know that somebody who would then go on to murder 2 people and injure 6 others on our beautiful campus was just standing a dozen feet away from us at a protest.
So let me ask you, because in Florida, there's been a lot of, on the campuses, there's been a lot of political struggle about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and removing people that support anti-racist programs, or stifling of voices that are anti-racist and stand up for equal rights. And then on the other side of that is, of course, the white supremacy that you talk about. Do you think that this affected Phoenix Ickner, and what's been the response of your organization to that?
As we were learning who the shooter was, we also that's when we realized that he was mocking an SDS protest, and he was quoted mocking us, and right-wing grifters kind of took that and ran with it, and they framed it in a way that actually set him up as a member of SDS. So, on top of the shooting, now Tally SDS was dealing with these horrifying accusations of one of our members being the shooter himself, and it was just blatantly untrue if you read the article that he was quoted in. This comes after FSU has continued to bring white supremacists onto our campus, Like Charlie Kirk, just a couple of months before, that he had a speaking event as part of his hate tour called the American Comeback Tour. And this comes in the midst of FSU continuing to try to stifle our freedom of speech while uplifting white supremacist speakers like Charlie Kirk, and not doing anything to push back against racist students who harass other students on our campus.
Could you tell our Fight Back Radio listeners who Charlie Kirk is, and give a little bit of background on this guy as well?
Yeah, so Charlie Kirk has unfortunately kind of blown up recently. He's a far-right reactionary who has stated that he believes the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. He said that Martin Luther King was awful, and he's just generally one of the most hateful voices of the Republican Party. He comes onto college campuses to debate students, but really he just wants to garner reactions and clip farm students in order to spread his hate. He comes onto campuses and pushes transphobia, racism, and at FSU, he came onto our campus on February 28th, and there was a crowd of thousands of his supporters, and they were emboldened by him to throw bottles at us, shout racial slurs at us. They came over to our side, the protesting side, to attempt to intimidate us. And this is an event that was greenlit by FSU. As much as they like to say that, Turning Point USA, the organization that brought Charlie Kirk onto campus, is a student organization and that FSU had nothing to do with it, the truth of the matter is that this Charlie Kirk event took place on Landis Green, which is the most popular green space at FSU. And they gave him half of the damn green to spread his hate and his lies using amplified sound. But thankfully, we showed up, and there was a huge student turnout to protest them. About 150 students came out, marched to Landis Green to tell Charlie Kirk to get off our campus. And we were actually able to drown out a lot of the BS that he was saying that day.
Okay. And so the amplified sound is an important piece too, because correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I understand, and this is starting to happen on campuses across the country, they've outlawed any kind of amplification, whether it be bullhorns or whatever, microphones and things like that. So it's hard to have any kind of public protest or program unless they give it their blessing, and apparently FSU did in this case.
Yeah, they granted Charlie Kirk amplified sound, but anytime we have a protest, there's a member of the student conduct office standing side by side by a member of FSU PD to tell us that we can't use amplified sound at our protests. And it was no different that day with the Charlie Kirk event. We were not allowed to use it, but Charlie Kirk was. And this change to the student code of conduct, it didn't come from thin air. It came, really, we see it as a result of our encampments for Gaza that happened last spring semester, about a year ago. Because up until that point, we were able to use amplified sound at all of our protests with very little issue. Sometimes they tell us, hey, you need to cut it off at a certain time because classes are happening right here and we don't want those classes to be disrupted, right? But never outright banning us from using amplified sound until we had this huge protest in solidarity with Palestine. So these changes to the student code of conduct are a direct result of SDS's protests being effective, and FSU admin is scared of that.
Yeah. So let me go back to this this shooter, Phoenix Ickner, who killed two people, this white supremacist who killed two people and injured six others. And he was at this Charlie Kirk program, and you guys were protesting it. And so tell me a little bit about what the discussions in SDS were like leading up to the Charlie Kirk protest, and why you decided, okay, this is an important stand for us to take, and that we need to we need to say something and not just allow this to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important for students students with a conscience to stand up against hateful speakers coming onto our campus, and this is not happening within a vacuum, right? This is a direct result of Trump being reelected to the presidency, and now all these reactionary speakers are coming to campus, either funded by Turning Point USA or other organizations, and we wanted to stand up and fight back against Charlie Kirk because we've been demanding that FSU keep his ass off our campus for years now. I remember when I was a freshman, spring 2020. I mean, I wasn't a part of SDS yet, but I saw that Charlie Kirk was coming to campus and that SDS was protesting it. And so students have been demanding for a long time that Charlie Kirk stay the hell off our campus. I was a part of a protest, I believe, back in 2022 against Charlie Kirk. And now again in 2024, he's returned to our campus to just spread his hate and his lies. This is a concerted effort by far-right reactionaries to embolden their right-wing supporters, like the shooter, right, to continue attacking marginalized students, black students, brown students, immigrant students as well, and normalize these discussions of DEI rollbacks too, right? So these things are very connected. Charlie Kirk comes onto a campus to spread hate and lies. Meanwhile, FSU is secretly, quietly removing DEI initiatives that actually make our campus safer and give students a chance to succeed. An FSU, in the wake of the Trump administration, actually removed LGBTQ housing at our university, and FSU just did this quietly without saying anything. FSU students stood up. Tallahassee SDS organized a protest against this removal of LGBTQ housing, and we actually won LGBTQ housing back, and that was a big victory, probably the biggest victory of my time in Tallahassee SDS. So that was huge. But yeah, these things, they don't come in a bubble. It's all connected, how the rollbacks are continuing on top of the hate ramping up, and we have to continue to show out and fight against it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a new day on the campus is, and not for the better, with these right wing groups. I mean, for years, we've been, fighting, even when I was a student 100 years ago, we were fighting against racism on campus and to try to give opportunities and equality, and against, teaching history of marginalized, black, brown people, indigenous people. But I don't think we had, these kind of organizations like Turning Point USA, that would be overtly spouting racist and or neo-fascist or whatever you want to call it kinds of points of view. Could you talk a little bit about you mentioned that FSU tries to wash their hands of this by saying, well, this is a student group, Turning Point USA. Can you talk a little bit about how Turning Point USA looks like in Tallahassee? And then also how FSU and other colleges let them get away with their hatred.
So Turning Point USA at FSU specifically, we have a very interesting dynamic with them. It's not positive, of course. They're very antagonistic towards Tallahassee SDS. And rightfully so, because they should be scared of us, right? In terms of like students standing up and fighting back against the racism that this organization is trying to push. So Turning Point USA at FSU specifically, it is filled to the brim with racist students, right? The day before the Charlie Kirk protest happened, we had somebody who was actually in the Turning Point USA group chat send us and it was just students saying horrible things like the Civil Rights Act should be overturned, is what they were saying. They were saying that the NAACP is an evil organization, and this was in response to the NAACP condemning Charlie Kirk coming to our campus. And they were saying anti-Semitic things. They were mocking people who planned on going to the Charlie Kirk protest. So this is an organization that, you know, just feels comfortable openly saying that they think that the Civil Rights Act should be overturned. And FSU, you know, allows these students to get away with saying those things, and not just saying those things, but spreading propaganda that normalizes those ideas, like the Charlie Kirk speaking event, like allowing racist students to harass other students. It's honestly pretty shameful that Turning Point USA can get away with that, but FSU is so willing to crack down on Tallahassee Students for a Democratic Society for standing against it. They threatened us with arrest and trespassing charges and code of conduct charges because we wouldn't comply with every single ridiculous order they gave us at that Charlie Kirk protest. And that's really just the standard for them at any protest that's organized by Tallahassee SDS.
Yeah, yeah. So let me then, I mean, before we went on the air, you were telling me about this tour that Riley Gaines is doing. And so it's around campuses across the country where they're, and as you know, it came back to mind as you were talking about the fight for housing for trans people in Tallahassee on the campuses and that victory that you had there. Could you talk a little bit about you know, Riley Gaines, who that is first off, and then what this tour is and how that fits in with some of this you know, white supremacist and you know, far right wing you know, organizing that's going on the campuses?
Yeah, so Riley Gaines is first and foremost a transphobic sore loser. She tied for 5th place in a swimming competition with a trans swimmer, a trans woman, and she, you know, she's been crying about it ever since, right? So, you know, this issue of trans women in women's sports is, you know, a talking point that transphobes like to push a lot in order to reduce the rights of trans people broadly. And Riley Gaines is like their darling girl that they're sending around the country to hold these hateful speaking events, and it's you know, supported by Turning Point USA as well. So nationally, this tour has been happening all over the place. Students at UW Seattle actually stood up against Riley Gaines' speaking event. About 100 people came out to disrupt the event, and they did. They disrupted the event, showed that Riley Gaines wasn't welcome on campus. And then students at Portland State University, part of PSU SDS, also came out to the Riley Gaines speaking event to protest it. Shamefully, that day, 4 people were arrested for the supposed crime of protesting against Riley Gaines.
Boy, that's incredible. Well, let me follow up on that, because there's been, you know, there's been lots of repression on the campuses, and again, not just the right wing, you know, student organizations and right wing money and et cetera going into universities, and we're also seeing, you know, this kind of repression, which I don't think happened, you know, at this kind of level before, at least not, you know, in many years. And to me, a lot of this goes back to Columbia University, where they, you know, the encampments and the protests against Palestine, and you know, early this year, you know, we saw where a Palestinian student, Mahmoud Khalil, was, you know, kidnapped by Homeland Security, and you know, they tried to deport him, and now they've done that to another student. Can you talk a little bit about you know, Columbia University, the encampments there, and the repression, and how you see that in relation to some of the other repression that's going on around the country right now?
Yeah, I think that the protests and the encampments at Columbia University both made a lot of people aware what was happening in Gaza, the ongoing genocide perpetrated by Israel and supported by the U.S. So it woke people up to the issues that were happening in Gaza, but it also kind of, showed a spotlight on the repression that the U.S. is willing to engage in, and that our universities are willing to engage in order to shut down pro-Palestine protests. So, Colombia last year had mass arrests, and that honestly just brought on more people to come out and support Palestine and support the people who were arrested. And then this year, kind of as a result of that, obviously those encampments were happening under the Biden administration. And now, Trump is kind of adding his own spin on this repression, where now, it's not just arrests, but he's actively targeting immigrant students who are pro-Palestine, like Mahmoud Khalil and Leka Kordia and so many others. And it's an attempt to scare people into submission, to get them to stop standing up and fighting back for Palestine. But it's really done the opposite. It's just added fanned the flames of pro-Palestine protests. And I just saw a few days ago, Columbia students occupied a library on their university, and that led to even more arrests and brutalizations by police. But the movement for Palestine is not going anywhere until Palestine is free. And I mean, following the arrest, I shouldn't call it an arrest. Like you said, it is a kidnapping of Mahmoud Khalil by the Department of Homeland Security. There was a wave of protests across the country calling for his immediate release, and all other immigrant students who had been arrested, their immediate release. So students are coming together to show their university administration, you need to actually stand up for your immigrant students instead of being silent. And I actually want to bring up, a protest that SDS had been planning, right? We had been planning to have a protest of 3 international students having their visas revoked at FSU. Previously, we had SDS members actually ask President Richard McCullough what FSU's plan was to protect immigrant students, how they were going to handle ICE on campus. And he straight up said, we're not going to address that right now. So a student actually outright asked him what he was going to do to protect immigrant students, and he just said he didn't want to answer. And that's pretty common for President Richard McCullough. He loves dodging questions, running away from people. He literally ran away from us a few days after that question was asked. So FSU admin clearly didn't want to do anything to protect immigrant students, and that resulted in 3 international students losing their visas. So SDS, called an emergency planning meeting, and we organized a march to protest these student visa revocations. And that protest was actually scheduled for the day that the shooting happened, April 17th. It's honestly pretty scary to think that, this shooter who had openly mocked SDS before was just a few hours away from being in the vicinity of one of our protests yet again. And we canceled that protest for the time being. Obviously, it's still an ongoing issue, but for the safety of everybody and to get the situation sorted out, we had to cancel it. Yeah, but it continues to be an issue, right? The issue has not been resolved. FSU has not made a real substantive statement about protecting immigrant students. So the fight continues, even though that particular protest was postponed for the time being.
So I know SDS has been involved with immigrant rights for some nationally and locally, and it's an issue that's been important as you fight for equality and rights for all people. But I wanted to ask you about a guy locally in Tallahassee, Juan Carlos. Could you tell us a little bit about his situation and what's going on there?
Yeah, so Juan Carlos is a U.S. citizen who was detained by ICE and brought to the Leon County Jail. And he had the records to prove that he was a U.S. citizen. And the only reason they detained him was because he was having trouble, communicating with them in English. He doesn't speak much English. And so that was the reason that they detained him. And this news came out the day of the shooting on April 17th. And SDS had our own stuff to deal with, with the shooting happening on our university. But the Tallahassee Immigrant Rights Alliance actually coordinated an emergency protest outside of the Leon County Jail to demand Juan Carlos's immediate release, and another victory for Tallahassee activists and the immigrant rights movement is that Juan Carlos was released just a couple of hours after the protest began.
Okay, that's good news. That's very good news. I wanted to ask you also about the aftermath of this shooting, and you've talked a little bit how you've had to deal with misinformation and attacks from the right and the corporate media about what's about what happened there. But also, I saw in Fight Back News that you had a queer rave right after that. It was kind of try to look on the bright side. Well, maybe you can characterize what it was. You're mentioned in the article as, one of the people that introduced it, but what were you trying to do with that? And how are you going forward in these days after the shooting?
Yeah, so we had already planned that queer rave as a fundraiser for SDS. But then, following the shooting on April 17th, we weren't even sure if we should continue with the queer rave. We weren't sure if it felt right. This really devastating and dark thing just happened on our campus. But, we asked the DJs who were involved with the rave, and we asked the venue, and we asked a lot of our members how they felt about it. And everybody was pretty much on board with moving forward with the rave. But we wanted to make it instead a fundraiser for the victims of the April 17th shooting. One of the victims of the shooting, she was still in the hospital at the time, and we were able to raise $550 for her to, help with the hospital bills that she's dealing with. I think it was the right move because this is such a dark event to strike our campus, but we didn't let it stop us from coming together as a community and uplifting each other, having some fun together, and expressing joy in such dark times. And also, doing something very positive for our community by helping out the victims of the shooting.
So, as the school year ends, around the country, how do you see, how would you sum up this school year? Obviously, it was, this shooting gave a devastating thing for FSU, but looking even more broadly or nationally, Trump took office during this last semester and has made many very bold moves, and none of them good. As activists and progressives who are trying to fight for a better world, how do you look at this semester, and what are your thoughts going into the summer and next year?
So clearly we have a big fight ahead of us. Trump is attacking all of our rights. He's attacking immigrant rights, trans rights, women's rights, reproductive rights. And we have to continue as students to build a movement against Trump, right? Pretty much every protest we did this semester was in some way related to Trump. With Charlie Kirk coming to campus, that is, of course, spawned by Trump's re-election as president. And, that immigrant rights protest that we had planned was, spawned from Trump's attacks on immigrants. And then we had a protest following the shooting. So we had a protest on April 24th. It was in direct response to the shooting. Actually, it was 1 week after the shooting. And it was essentially just the the product of the rage, the anger, the sadness that students were feeling, that this entirely preventable shooting happened. The shooter was clearly a white supremacist. His peers all stated that he was racist and misogynist, and he had mocked an SDS anti-Trump protest. So we're coming out there to say enough is enough. Once and for all, FSU admin needs to actually do something to address the issue of white supremacy on campus. They roll out the red carpet for Charlie Kirk. They do absolutely nothing when black students are harassed by white supremacists. And this just leads to a campus where racists feel comfortable. They feel comfortable and they feel emboldened to continue attacking others. And this hate that's inside of them just builds up until, you have a situation like the April 17th shooter where there's just so much hate inside of him that he lashed out on members of our community. And so FSU admin, since the shooting, has been giving a lot of empty promises, saying, we're never going to forget this, and we will never forget this, of course, but what are you going to do to actually address the root cause of this problem? The shooter was a white supremacist, and they're not doing anything to address that. Instead, they're, repressing progressive students, right? So we had a march from Landis Green, where that Charlie Kirk event happened just 2 months prior. And we marched to the Westcott building, which is where the administration offices are. We wanted FSU admin to hear us loud and clear, right? So we were demanding that FSU admin make a public commitment to never hosting a white supremacist speaker on campus ever again. That FSU admin work with members and leadership of identity-based student union groups like the Black Student Union, the Pride Student Union, the Hispanic Latine Student Union, to actually develop a code of conduct policies targeting hate speech. And then finally, we demanded that FSU admin actually take action against students who engage in racist behavior and harassment of other students. And so this was a march that about 30 people came out to. It was the end of the semester, so, unfortunately, a lot of people had already left, but that was still a pretty big turnout for, the end of the semester. And we made it loud and clear. One of the chants we had was, prevent another tragedy, smash white supremacy. We repeated that over and over and over, along with the victims' names, Robert Morales and Tiru Chabba. Say their names, because we didn't want FSU admin to think that they're just absolved from this situation because they're sad about this. I get that Richard McCullough is sad about this situation. I get that other members of FSU admin are sad about this situation, but you need to let your sadness and your anger move you to actually make changes to prevent another tragedy. And frankly, FSU admin has shown no interest in doing that. When we come back to these experiences of FSU admin saying, no, we're not going to answer that question, or President McCullough literally running away from us when we try to ask him questions, we know that they're hearing us, right? But they're not listening to us. And so that day we decided, enough is enough, for real. And so amplified sound is, of course, allowed for white supremacists, but it's not allowed for student protesters like SDS. So at the end of the protest, I turned on a speaker, I pulled out a microphone, and I chanted, prevent another tragedy, smash white supremacy, so that FSU admin could hear us loud and clear what we were demanding. I was warned multiple times by the police that I need to stop, right? Because they're given guidance by FSU admin to shut down our protests as soon as they get a little bit disruptive. And I've been going to this school for 6 years. 6 years. And the culmination of my experience at this university is that members of my community have been attacked and killed, and FSU admin wasn't going to do anything about it unless we actually caused some amount of disruption. So I ignored police orders and I continued chanting, and for that I was arrested. I've since been banned from campus. I've been told that if I return to campus, I'll be rearrested. And it's honestly shameful because I love FSU's campus and I love the community that I am a part of there. But, it's really disgusting that FSU admin would rather take action against anti-racist protesters than take action against actual racist students. I mean, I straight up asked a member of FSU admin, Dennis Schnittker, the assistant vice president of communications at FSU, if he thinks that for a little bit of context, there was an incident in the fall semester where a white student, a racist, called black students chimps, and he posted about it to social media. There was a whole town hall held by the NAACP, and FSU admin threw their hands up and said, we can't do anything about this. First Amendment rights. Basically, it's a right. It's the right for racists to attack black students. That's and we saw the same thing on during Charlie Kirk's event where his supporters shouted slurs at members of our protest. Right. So racists get away with whatever they want, but if you pull out amplified sound and you denounce racism, you'll get arrested. I need to digress. I'm getting a little off track, but this conversation that I had with a member of FSU admin, Dennis Schnittker, I asked him straight up, can we agree that calling black students chimps is white supremacy? And all he could say was he thinks it's very bad behavior, but he won't say one way or another what is what, right? So this is a member of...
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So this is a member of FSU admin being asked straight up. It's blatant white supremacy. I mean, it's honestly a very easy answer, and he couldn't even say that it was. And what is his reasoning? You have to wonder why he couldn't just say, yes, it is white supremacy, right? So that was a conversation that I had a couple of days before the protest. And so I laid out our demands very clearly to that member of admin, and he didn't give me a single straight answer about what FSU was actually going to do to tackle the issue of white supremacy. We've tried time and time again to ask FSU admin to make these changes, and they've just flat out refused or ignored us.
So in your case, then you used the amplified sound. You were arrested, right, and charged with a misdemeanor. And
Yes.
Then you've been banned from campus. You graduated though, right? So in the meanwhile, so you am I correct? You weren't allowed to go to your own graduation?
Yeah. I graduated with my master's degree in social work, but I wasn't allowed to actually walk at my graduation. If I had attempted to go to graduation, I would have been arrested. And, it's pretty upsetting that I couldn't, celebrate that achievement with my family and my friends by walking across the stage. But
it's messed up.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
really messed up. But, at the same time, I wouldn't take back what I did because FSU admin has ignored this problem for far too long.
Yeah. No, I agree, man. Oh. Let me pivot here a little bit to another case of student repression. We talked earlier about Columbia, but just across the river in New Jersey, at Rutgers, it's an elite university. There was recently congressman there held a Week for Israel kind of thing that was protested by the SDS chapter at Rutgers. Along with Jewish Voices for Peace and I think DSA and maybe some others. But could you talk a little bit about what happened at Rutgers campus?
Yeah, so the local Zionist organizations held a week on campus called Israel Week. It's a very common thing. It's even happened at FSU, where they basically just spend an entire week celebrating this apartheid state that has continued to engage in acts of genocide against the Palestinian people. And so at Rutgers, there was a Zionist congressman who was invited to speak about Israel. And SDS members there, held a protest to shame him and get him off campus, this congressman. And actually, there was 4 people arrested, right? 3 of them have been released, but one of them was a non-student, and he still hasn't been released, and he's dealing with 2 felony charges now for the crime of protesting a genocide. SDS nationally is calling for his immediate release, but yeah, I mean, like you said, this is just a continuation of the pro-Israel repression of pro-Palestine voices, right?
Yeah, no, it's and I want to keep going with this. I mean, well, it's outrageous. First off, let's just say that, but it's there's this attack on protest of any kind, or anybody who tries to stand up and voice their point of view. It's like free speech if you're a hardcore racist, but it's whatever. It's you get arrested or thrown off out of school, or charged with a felony, or whatever. And there's a case of this also. I want to ask you about Chris Gibson, who's from the University of Central Florida. Could you tell us a little bit about that, about him and what's been going on?
Yeah, so at the University of Central Florida, they have an SDS chapter as well. And Chris Gibson is a student at UCF, and on October 7th, 2024, the 1-year anniversary of the Palestinian liberation fighters, fighting back against Israel and Israel's heightened genocide against the Palestinian people began that day. On the anniversary of that day, protesters in Orlando, Florida, went out to City Hall to protest in support of Palestine, and they were actually kicked out of City Hall, and the doors were locked by the police there. And Chris Gibson was one of the protesters who attempted to reopen the doors to get back in there, because they're members of that community. They have a right to voice their concerns with city council, and for that, Chris Gibson was charged with a felony. The bullshit charge that they're trying to throw on him is that he committed battery against a law enforcement officer, and it's just not true. From the body cam footage that was recently released and posted by UCF SDS, we can see that Chris Gibson was not the one who was battering, but that he was actually brutalized by Orlando police and wrongfully arrested, and now he's facing felony charges for standing up for Palestine.
Yeah, I mean it's concerning. But I mean, I'll say this. I mean, just as I'm not a student, haven't been for a long time, but I'm impressed with in the midst of all this repression, people being kidnapped and deported, people being brought up on felonies, or in your case, being banned from campus. So it's things that are very, very serious. In some cases, others less so. But just this constant pushback. You can't speak out about Israeli foreign policy, but you can, say blatantly racist or homophobic things. It's just outrageous. But the protests continue, and they seem, in some cases at least, to be getting bigger. So my hat's off to the youth who are on the campuses, who are daring to struggle and daring to stand up to this kind of repression. In that vein, there's a battle in the Tallahassee area as well, that your chapter is taken up to some degree at FAMU, about who the next president of that university will be, and that's a historically black university. Could you talk a little bit about the situation there as well, and what's going on and what you guys are doing about it?
Yeah, so throughout this conversation, I've largely been talking about issues at FSU. Tallahassee SDS is largely made up of FSU students, but we do have members who are part of Florida A&M University. Like you said, it's a historically black university. We also have members who are students at Tallahassee State College, who come out and struggle with us. But right now, FAMU students are outraged at the potential of a certain university president potentially being appointed. Her name is Marva Johnson. She has deep ties to DeSantis and his lackeys, the Republican Party. She's fought to make cuts to public institutions in favor of private ones. And she actually hasn't even held a position in higher education before. So she's completely unqualified. And beyond being unqualified, she set to attack DEI initiatives and, things that actually benefit Black students at FAMU. And so you have to wonder, like, why is this woman who's very clearly opposed to the well-being of the students at FAMU even being considered for this position? Right now, students at FAMU are planning a protest just a couple days from this conversation to, show that they do not want Marva Johnson to be the next university president. They want a president that actually represents their interests. And Tallahassee SDS will be out there to support them in any way that we can.
Yeah, no, that's great. And my hat's off again to I mentioned the students in general, but especially I think the Students for a Democratic Society. You have chapters all over the country, and you've established this national organization that has integrity and is really been willing to stand up. We had Aaron Boyle, the vice president of SDS, on a few episodes ago, and I encourage people to go back and listen to that episode as well. It's a good goes along with this one pretty well, I think. But she talks about you can contact SDS if you want to establish a chapter at your university or college, or if you have a group that would like to affiliate with the national organization. And so I would encourage people to do that. But I'm also encouraged, I think, by we just had a May Day not that long ago, where May 1st, International Workers' Day, where historically people all over the world come together and stand up for workers' rights and things of justice and whatever the kinds of things that SDS has been doing in Tallahassee and around the country. But I think it's Trump's attacks on everybody, just so these ferocious attacks, and we've talked about some of them here. It brings a need for unity with immigrants, Black people, workers, students, whatever. Could you talk a little bit about the United Front against Trump and what you think that should look like, and any advice you have for our Fight Back Radio listeners on how to get involved or how to approach these days of attack on people's rights?
Yeah, so with the May Day that you brought up, interestingly enough, I actually was not able to attend the May Day protests because it was organized by our local FRSO, and they had the protest at WFSU Studios. There was a town hall happening with a bunch of city commissioners, and they were going out to protest against the city's compliance with the 287G agreement, which essentially, is saying that local law enforcement will work with ICE to continue detaining immigrants. It's part of Trump's attacks on immigrants. So they went out to the WFSU studios to ask questions of our city commissioners and get some answers about why they're cooperating with the 287G agreement, why they signed it. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there again because it was WFSU, part of FSU's campus. But I know that there was a big fight that day waged to bring awareness to the fact that the city commissioners have signed this agreement. And I should backtrack. It wasn't city commissioners that signed the agreement. It was Chief Lawrence Revel, the chief of the Tallahassee Police Department, who signed the agreement. And city commissioners have done nothing to denounce it or stand up for immigrant rights. So what I would say to people who want to get engaged in the fight against Trump's attacks is to, look to whatever local organization is organizing those fights against those Trump's attacks on our rights, whether it's, a chapter of SDS on your university, or it's a chapter of an organization like NARPR. And
which is the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. But yeah, thank you. We've had guests from that organization on Fight Back Radio as well. So I'd encourage people to go back and listen to them. But I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Lain.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression in Tallahassee, their affiliate is the Tallahassee Community Action Committee, an organization led by amazing activists. One of them was actually on your show just a few months back, Delilah. TCAC and Tallahassee Immigrant Rights Alliance. They're waging the struggle for police accountability and also for our city to stop complying with ICE. And I'm sure that Trump is bringing out, if there's one thing that he's good at bringing out a lot of people to fight back against his hateful policies. So it really shouldn't be too hard for you to look in your area and find people who want to stand up against Trump and to join their protests, and not just join their protests, but actually organize with them, because this struggle has to be an organized one, right? It's one thing to go out to your town hall or the Capitol once a month, but it's another to actually join in an organization so that we can build up a sustained fight against Trump. So that's what I would say to people, is to join a local organization that is waging the struggle against Trump. If you're a student, start an SDS chapter. Reach out to National SDS. There's the New Areas Committee that's getting people set up with starting new chapters, and there's new chapters of SDS starting every day.
Okay, and we can put in the show notes the contact info for Students for a Democratic Society for those people who are interested. You can scroll down and find that. Unfortunately, our time is starting to run out, Lain, and you've been a fabulous guest. I appreciate you being generous with your time. But before we go, if there's anything you want to add, or anything we didn't cover, or anything you want to underline before we end the interview.
Yeah, I want to say thank you so much for having me on your show, Richard. It's really an honor. I just wanted to mention that the struggle against white supremacy at FSU is not over. Right? FSU demonstrated that day that they arrested me that they would rather shut down a peaceful protest, a peaceful, albeit a little bit disruptive protest, in favor of standing up for white supremacy, right? So they've chosen their side, but we're going to continue fighting to get the charges dropped. We're going to continue fighting for those demands that I mentioned earlier. And actually on May 29th at 8:30 a.m. Is my first court appearance to get the charges dropped. So we'll be doing a press conference around that and, bringing attention to our demands and hopefully getting the charges dropped. But I really want to reiterate the repression that is just happening across the country on student activists. My case is nothing compared to what Chris Gibson at UCF and Thomas Whitehead over at Rutgers are dealing with. They're dealing with felony charges for standing against Zionism and standing up for Palestine. I'm hoping that students see that and see that their university administration, the local law enforcement is cracking down on these protests, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they're actually standing up for what is right. And I hope that students see that and they're continue to be inspired by students who are really risking it all to fight back against Trump's attacks on our rights.
All right. Well said. Well said. Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you, Richard.
What an episode. I guess this shows again that the student movement is the moral conscience of our country. And so I want to thank Lain Dorsey. And also, full disclosure, Lain has just joined our production team here at Fight Back Radio as well. So we get a fighter with that kind of energy on our team. So thank you and welcome aboard, Lain. So there's a lot to be done. There's repression going on, and we need to fight back against it. We're just passing May Day right now, and as Lain was speaking, I was thinking of the May Day martyrs who, when they were being prosecuted, the prosecutor, the state's attorney said, don't convict these men for what they've done, but for what they think, because their ideas are dangerous. And that's what we're seeing with Trump. He's just deporting people. He's, going after people for their speech, for saying that, standing up to imperialism and repression. And so I want to, the students in the face of that, have continued to stand up, as well as others, but I think especially the student movement and Lain Dorsey too. So I want to thank you all for that. And then I want to thank our Fight Back Radio listeners. It's important that you continue to stand up. You continue to go to protests, talk to your neighbors, your coworkers about what's going on. Every day there's something new happening in terms of repression. We need to stand together and push back against the Trump agenda. May Day was a huge step forward for us, but as the summertime comes, we need to continue to fight. So I hope to see all of you in the streets. So before we sign off, I want to thank the person who does our music for all our shows for 3 years now, Andy Koch, as well as our production team, Fiani Aboma Mahana, Lain Dorsey, Dodd McColgan, Shane Tremley, Natalie Pranis, and Vince Olson. And I'm Richard Berg for the entire Fight Back Radio team, saying until next time, all power to the people.